Man, every time it starts off with this black screen, even though that's not exactly what people are seeing. So, it's happening, Cody. Now my shit is frozen. It's happening again. We were literally just talking for 5 minutes.
Crystal
prior
clear.
to this.
Dude,
I don't know. I got nothing. I got nothing at this point. The show sucks, Cody. We can cancel it.
Sorry, guys. We're out of here.
Dude, I don't know what this is. What is the deal here? This is two shows in a row, and it's clearly only when we go live. By the way.
Yeah, and it's only you. Me and Pat are fine.
I'm on a cell connection, and I'm doing better than you on my iPad. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, that doesn't even none of this makes sense. You know what else doesn't make sense? Why people don't understand the value of heavy days.
Whoa, curveball! What? Jumped in.
That is called a segue. Since we have shitty internet, dude, we don't have good internet. I've been on calls all day for the past 2 days, and now it's StreamYard. That's what I've determined. It's StreamYard.
It's gotta be StreamYard.
Anyway, back for breaking down the level 2. Pat Barber here, world-class coach, world-class dad, world-class volleyball player also apparently.
That last one was not true, and the other two are larger than life. But I do appreciate the final one is definitely not true. The other two are decent though. I'll take those accolades.
Could you beat Tom Cruise while both of you wearing jeans?
Yes, I would beat Tom Cruise. That is 100% sure true. Yes.
Then that in fact makes you world class. So, yeah. But yeah, so today the topic is heavy days, and we can riff on many other things like why the fuck my video won't work. But I'll try not to be as angry about it as.
You want to just stop your camera? That way we don't have to look at frozen.
I mean, maybe I don't. Let's just just stop it and just see if that. Yeah, at least this little circle lights up the way it's supposed to when I talk. Like that works.
It looks like you got it.
But this is my emoji, just a little circle head. But yeah, so we're gonna dive into the heavy days portion of the level 2. So we can talk about this in
a lot over the years. I mean, the delivery of it at the level 2 has changed a lot. Like
so
where it's at, yeah.
You could probably speak to that better than I could. So you've been working level 2s significantly longer than I have. I think I've only been working level 2s for, I don't know, call it 5 or 6 years. I have no idea actually, but you have been doing it much longer. So can you speak to that? Like what have been some of the changes in that setting specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, it never was, initially it wasn't part of the level 2. Like it didn't exist as its own specific section. It came into existence, I think, due to due to necessity more than anything else. And now it gets its own little special place and is spoken about a little differently. The content's exactly the same. It's no different when we're talking about like the programming content for CrossFit is pretty much never changed since the beginning, since Greg wrote it and he talked about it. But the actual chunk at the level 2 didn't exist as like this is a heavy day section for a while, and then it kind of made its way in there because we just didn't see enough people understanding how to approach heavy days.
Right. So on that note, like I think it's worth noting like very little between both the level 1 and level 2 has changed over the past 15 years. Like I can think the nutrition lecture has changed. No, I wouldn't even say significantly, but it's changed probably 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. The pull-up breakout has changed. The thruster breakout has changed.
Snatch has changed a little.
Snatch has changed a little bit. But I would even say not so much from like what we teach, just like how it's executed.
Right. Yeah. The actual core content hasn't changed. I mean,
hasn't changed.
Like you said, the nutrition has changed a little in terms of where the focus is put, but the actual core content's pretty much the same.
So what's your experience when taking people through the heavy day portion in the level 2 environment specifically, right? So we'll start there and then we can reverse engineer this back to like executing this in the affiliate and different ways to do it.
Yeah.
But what's your experience with taking people through that in level 2?
Well, I think it's actually changed over the years. When we first input the level, the heavy days, it was because people didn't understand like who were coming in from generalized fitness and not strength and conditioning. They didn't understand how to do a heavy day. They didn't understand how to get to a percentage and stay there. It was like heavy days made their way in the old .com days. I don't even know do you remember this, Fern, where it was like, when you saw heavy days, it was almost like a rest day. It was like, cool,
right.
It's there. It's like you do
right.
like you use the working sets to build up to the final rep. And so like that was because we weren't given tons of guidance, and not everyone came from strength and conditioning. So it was kind of foreign, the idea of, up to 80% or at 80% or more of a 1 rep max for all of the sets, or
right.
depending on what type of rep scheme that you're doing. So the overall stimulus on the day, while still being really heavy, especially in the time period, like we had to coach people in to understanding how to get volume on a heavy day via getting the right loading and warm-ups ahead of time.
Right.
So it was like they weren't doing enough heavy. And then over the years, it's changed into like, hey guys, you don't need to do heavy every day. In fact, like this is how you approach a heavy day, and this is how you do an only heavy day, and then we give an example of that and whatnot. So it's kind of changed from like people didn't know how to do it to people did it way too much to now people are doing a half and half. So it's been this like weird world of needing to clarify where it sits and how to do it, but in different places over the years.
Well, it's one of those weird things where if you look at it, it's like statistically impressive that we could continue to get it wrong as a community, which is like, you don't do it enough, you do it way too much, and now you're doing it really poorly. And it's just like, can we just do it right? Which is like,
well, yes. But each one of these iterations, I totally understand why that was the case. Like each one makes sense, and you kind of have to turn the mirror back on ourselves and be like, is there something we're displaying incorrectly? If this has happened 3 different ways incorrectly, maybe it's our communication. So I CrossFit's always done those pivots and tried to change to see if maybe there's a more effective way to communicate it. Yeah, but
on that, I mean, like, where do you see? Do you see somewhere where we could communicate it better?
Well, I think where it can be communicated is by the figureheads of our sport. And the people who have a platform. And I think that's one of the problems, is that oftentimes when it comes to programming, who we look to are the people who are not necessarily the coaches, but the people who are in front of the camera. And then we go, what do? They must know what they're talking about. And for a long time, there wasn't much, this is how you do it, from a high level coach who's got some fame and blah, 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 blah. And then they put that out there forward. So I think that's part of the strangeness, is that we're taking our messaging from a different source than we necessarily should have throughout the time.
Which is interesting, because like of all the kind of, I would argue that of all the modalities that we toy with inside of the CrossFit ecosystem, just basic strength building is the one that has the most data, practical application. And it's just like everybody just to reinvent the wheel. And I do think that I do agree with your assessment that like some of the industry leaders, and it's because of the sport, right? Like they're training for something very different. So like the strength training looks very different. But then if you overlay that on top of a normal person who's not exercising fast for their living, then it becomes a little bit problematic. And I think that's probably the issue. Yeah,
that's definitely a communication issue for sure. I mean, there's a lot of subtlety within all of that, and there's many different. I mean, there's so much that goes into strength. And we don't do subtleties, Pat. We don't like contextual answers. We just like to make just blanket absolute statements that are just completely black and white, because that's the way. Perfect. The world works. That's how the way the world works. Chocolate and vanilla. That's all we got.
Right. So there's 2 components to this, right? So you have the actual execution of a training day and what the benefit of is to the athlete, and then you have the coach aspect of it, which is, how do I facilitate this correctly? Meaning, and we should actually define correctly. I guess we could define correctly as like executing a training session that would optimize the benefit for the athlete.
In the moment or overall?
Probably not in the moment, because just the nature of lifting heavy is damaging, but like overall, right? So the outcome of a heavy lifting session is going to be fatigue, muscle damage, and essentially what would result in a degradation in output of force. But then that would immediately be rectified by the repair of said muscles and all of that kind of stuff to create a stronger person or more reps or whatever at the end of the day.
Right.
But I think there's a certain kind of volume there, both in overall load and reps, in order that's necessary in order to do that. And the tricky part about that is that's a sliding scale. It's different for everybody.
Totally. And I think that's one of the places that makes it difficult to have like, well, I think the two places that make it really difficult to have a like, this is how it's done sort of answer is that
Right.
there is a lot of variation into this is how it could be done. And any given single day doesn't really define a great program. It's more the longevity of the program and how it all works together. So oftentimes when people speak about, whether it be, I mean, the things in our community are strength only days or strength and Metcon days or blah, blah, blah. They speak about them as like individual days. And it's like individually, you can make an argument for everything to be in our program. It's on the whole and the long-term goal that we're going for. So like that communication makes it hard for us to have really clear answers on things at times. And I think that's part of the messaging issues that we have. And then the other thing is I think people are training for different goals. I think a lot of the time people don't identify exactly what they're trying to do. So within the context of our conversation, I'm assuming that you and I are both talking about for improving someone's fitness as
Correct.
being work capacity across broad time modal domains, not just for improving one's strength.
Yep.
So oftentimes contextually too, when we have conversations, we're speaking to somebody who's a specialist and they're saying your program sucks. And we're saying with regards to what? They're saying with regards to my shit. And you're like, okay, well, your shit is part of our shit. But
yeah, we weren't doing your shit.
Yeah. So I think
we were doing something else.
Exactly. So I think it's hard to have those conversations, and they're very worth having. But I think the less inflammatory you can be, the more stuff happens within them, and the more definitions you can put out ahead of time for what you're trying to accomplish, make them that much more meaningful.
Well, yeah, and it's fair to use to that point exactly, which is using the CrossFit's definition of strength with this, which is the productive application of force. It's like it's not contractile potential. It's not anything. It's like what can you do with said muscular contraction, whatever that might be. What is the actual outcome?
But that's an interesting one too, because even in our own level 1, we define strength both ways. So we have the definition of strength being the productive application of force. We say, hey, this is our definition. But in the 10 general physical skills, when we list strength as one of those physiological adaptations, we're actually referencing contractile potential. So We're using the classic definition of strength, which carries validity. I mean, potential is important because you have to have the potential in order to actuate that potential. But we then latch on to the productive application in an effort to deliver technique as a viable means of improvement. So it's that even makes it more confusing, because someone who reads the level 1 is going to like see both sides and be like, shit, I see that one there. Wait, which one are you talking about this? And then they see this one over here. This is how you define it. And it's like, yes, but that one's also important. What are we talking about right now? Well,
I don't think one invalidates the other, right? Meaning, so like the traditional, which is contractile potential, is in fact a valid definition, but I would argue it is also in fact incomplete, right? So like if you just have contractile potential, then it's just like, that's like saying, well, I have the potential to make a lot of money. However, I am still broke, right? Which is kind of like, all right, well, okay, cool. Well, that doesn't, which is different than, okay, yes, your contractile potential is in fact a variable, but at the end of the day, if we're talking about practical application of any training program, then we have to be like, what can you do with said potential? Which is like, I remember one time I was working at level 1 and Mike G was the flow, and some like how weird they were something. There was I won't call it an argument. There was a conversation that ensued in one of the lectures, and the guy was like, I have the potential to lift 600 pounds. And Mike G was like, well, can you lift 600 pounds? And he's like, well, no. And he's like, well, then who cares? It's like, it's like, okay, it's a pretty succinct answer. So with regard to heavy days, what What's your idea? Like forget definitions, right? But when you think of a training for heavy day, right? Because obviously you've done a tremendous amount of programming over the years. When you think about training or putting in a heavy day, what do you envision? What does that look like if you could describe it and not necessarily define it?
For me, a heavy day is a single focused day where you do one heavy lift. And it doesn't mean build up to a single 1 rep max. It may be threes, it may be fives. More often than not, it's threes and fives. A 1 rep max is more of a testing day, but it's threes and fives, or maybe even some slightly higher percentages, like a 20 rep back squat or something like that, with a hefty warm up that gets your body juiced and going, breathing hard, things like that. Not a workout, but a warm up. And then some really focused skill work on the heavy that you're doing, and then a very dedicated, intense lifting session. That's my idea of a heavy day. And that takes a full hour or more. Like anybody who's a true strength athlete who talks about doing single modality heavy day lifts, like they'll let you know, like a full true heavy day takes a long time to get through. Did Fern bounce? Is he in and out there, Cody?
Yeah. I'm still here.
He's here. I think he's probably trying to join from his phone, maybe.
No, I'm just playing with shit. All right, so I'm just gonna move over to my FaceTime because I feel like that's not frozen.
That's frozen. Working. Look at that.
All right, so we'll figure out what the fuck's wrong with my camera. But anyway, okay, so I always think that's important, right? So like, because I do think there's room for a subjective discussion with regard to strength days. Meaning, so like I was having a conversation with the coaching staff the other day, and I said, hey, when we don't do it very often, but it does happen sometimes, meaning like we'll program a strength plus a Metcon.
So will we.
Right.
I think there's tons of value in that.
I think there's tons of value there, but I just don't think it should be all the time. And I think it should be acknowledged that when you pair those two things together, it comes with a lack of coaching just due to timetables, right? I don't think it's arguable. And I told him, I said, hey, when we write them in these formats, I want you guys to stop using the term 1 rep max, because that's not in fact what we're doing. And I think delineating between these two, meaning like, because 1 rep max comes with the general assumption that we are going full tilt, trying to break the thing. And I think
stars align, it's that time of the month again. You're like,
right. Like, let's go. Instead, I think we should just be like, yo, this is intended for as heavy as possible in the given time domain, recognizing that in that allotted time, you should probably get nowhere close to like a true, 1 rep max capacity. So I think that's where kind of like verbiage comes in. And I think delineating between those two, so that way, when I do use a 1 rep max, everybody knows what I mean. It also, I think there's a psychological component to that with regard to athletes, because if I don't give an appropriate timeline inside of a training session to accomplish something the way I would like to be accomplished, but they think something else is supposed to happen, I've now set them up for failure, right? So if I'm like, hey, 1 rep max, 15 minutes, and they're like, and then don't hit a 1 rep max because they only have the amount of time to go to like, I don't know, 80%. Now the athlete's like, I'm weaker. And that's not in fact the case, or very likely not the case.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, like we could come around with terminology talking about like an on the fly max, or like a ready state max, or like something where it's like, it's referencing being able to just like pop in. What can you hit relatively? It's not cold, but it's not focused. It's different. It's like a unfocused max almost. And I think there's value in that. That's far more applicable to life, right? Like, you're doing housework and you've got some sandbags you got to lift. You're not going to be like, give me like 45 minutes to warm up to this and like a couple workup sets and let's do this. It's like, can I just pick this shit up? And I think that's kind of more of what you're working when you do the two together like that. I'm under fatigue because I just did a Metcon, or psychologically I'm somewhere else because I got to do a Metcon next. What am I able to hit? And I think we definitely, there's tons of value there. I'm not against that. It's just when it's done every day like that, and you never give strength a serious look, and then as a coach you go, that's good. I'm doing well by my people for their lifetime. Or on the other side of it.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Or on the other side of it, where you're like, you're never going truly heavy. You're never giving them the opportunity to be under load that way. And then they don't really know how to approach that, which I think is also a mistake, and you need to go valuable there or add value there. Say it, Fern. You muted.
There's two things there. One is you kind of talk about like doing it every day. And the reason like largely you could see a degradation in output there is because of no ability to recover, right? So if you think about just training in general, like if I'm going to, and this was kind of the article that I sent over to Cody earlier, and that's kind of what I was talking about, is like, if I'm going to damage something, I don't know, like a muscle, then I need to give it the appropriate amount of time to recover, right? So like now can you pull that article up real quick, Cody? Right. So like, so this is like a super nerdy article, and you can drop the link to this in the article in the chat, Cody, too, for people to read. But it's talking about like the different types of fatigue. So there's like obviously the central nervous system fatigue, peripheral fatigue, which is the muscular system, and then just like muscular damage, right? And depending on like the percentage of loading and then the volume largely has an impact on which one of those that we're talking about. So if you're gonna do, and then obviously the type of lift, right? So compound versus like single limb movement or something like that. If you're gonna do, let's use like a 5x5 back squat, for instance. If I'm gonna do like 5x5 back squat, significant amount of both central nervous system fatigue and peripheral fatigue from that, at which point, like coming off of that a following day, I'm going to have some sort of degraded ability to perform at a certain level. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they're bad. It's just like understanding the effects of certain types of training with regard to the following day's training. Now you could combat that with like putting something that is not super heavy load on it, or is not, which would be good programming in my opinion. But I think that sometimes that is what needs to be taken into account, which is like we can touch something that's heavy, but we could also avoid a lot of the fatigue involved with that by looking at total volume.
Yeah.
So when you program heavy days, like when you guys program for warm up and workout, like do you guys have some pretty standard rep schemes that you guys use? I seem to remember you guys use a lot of 7s and 10s.
We will occasionally do 7s and 10s if we're doing stuff that warrants that, or if we're doing split stuff for some reason, we like to do like 7s and 10s, but like oftentimes it's 3s and 5s, and then even on our 1 rep max days, like when you look at the three different scales, the newest people don't do 1s generally, they're doing 3s just because it's like it's just more time and attention for them. Their overall loading is going to be a lot lower relative to just because they're still kind of like Bambi legsing it. So our general patterning is 1 in every 3 or 4 days would be some sort of a focused strength lift or a strength Metcon day. And so they filter their way in there pretty often. I mean, that being said, there's strength in everything else that we do. It's just we're not over biasing it towards a barbell and
yeah, it's also fair to acknowledge that like what you brought up there is not insignificant, meaning like strength. We typically think of strength as like barbell.
Yeah.
Right. The big 3, squat, press, pull, and then clean and jerk, snatch. Right.
Yeah.
But there are other obviously strength days in there. But more often than not, when we're referring to strength days inside of a CrossFit box, we're referring to some of the like those heavy barbell days.
Yeah.
Just generally speaking. So when you're from a coaching, so we talked a little bit about that from a training standpoint. From a coaching standpoint, how do you approach heavy days? Like, what's your desired outcome to a class of 15 general population? What are you trying to achieve on a heavy day?
Yeah, I'm achieving all of those people going to a place that is physiologically exhausting via loading, not via cardiorespiratory endurance necessarily, and staying there for whatever number of sets that I have. So I'm warming them up ahead of time and spending a bunch of time getting them ready. And then when I say go, they're pretty like right there on whatever they're lifting for all of the sets that we've given them. How I tend to fail on these days is not giving them enough warm-up time to truly get to places that are both psychologically and physiologically difficult. Actually, I think that's the main way I fail is like just not getting them there soon enough. And because I think more often than not, people will given the opportunity, people don't get heavy enough more often than not. Like I know that there's like the meathead dude who likes to go way too heavy, but more often than not with the clientele that I've dealt with in my life, it's like they're just not there. They don't know how to get to a place that's like, wow, I don't know if I could do that again. I can still move safely, but I don't know if I can make it. Yeah, I'm going to choose that as the weight that I start with. You know, like that's not easy to do. So coaching that psychology into the average human is hard. And I think that's where I tend to fail is occasionally I won't be able to get them enough time and attention.
So why do you think you fail there? I have my assumptions on why I think that is people fail at doing that inside of the context of a class. But like where would you say how do you fail there?
I usually lose it in my front end timing. Like I too much time like rapport building and stuff and playing games and doing generalized warm-ups and whatnot. And just not it's poor time management on my part more often than not.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like there's either it's poor time management or it's just paired with something else where like the time is not allotted. So like I typically would like to see, this is me personally as a coach, I would like to see a minimum of 25 minutes at working sets, meaning like we've done all the warm-ups, we've done all the general stuff, and we're like, yo, everybody's like primed, ready to go. We have done sets already, and it's like you have 25 minutes to get all these sets in, whatever it might be, 5x5, it might be 4x7, 7x10, like whatever it might be, but you have 25 minutes to 30 minutes to make that happen. I won't always get there, but more often than not that I will. And I think what I do when I did there is just like, I get to the barbell fast. I'm like, we do the general warm up, but then I'm like, a lot of the warm up we're going to be doing is like with that movement, working on, maybe some tempo stuff, some pauses potentially just as warm up pieces as we work through. But like we forego the lengthy warm up, and it's just like, I want to get the hips, knees, ankles ready to go, get your heart rate up a little bit, and it's like, go get a barbell, and we're going to do the remainder of this with a series of different kind of movement patterns with a barbell.
Yeah, but a series of jokes too far and you're 15 minutes over. I think that's what ends up happening to me. I think also what can throw it off is if you're doing a heavy day and a complex movement, something like a snatch or a clean, there needs to be sufficient time spent on mechanics, and like that can whittle away a lot more time than you would expect. Because maybe presented to you as something that you weren't expecting in a 15-person class, and you're like, shiza, this is not going to work how I want it to. So I think do you find those to be different? I find those to be different because I feel like typically the rep schemes and the loading is very different there. So like I won't need necessarily for like the more complex movement, like a clean and jerk, not so much. Snatch for sure. I think you can spend 15 minutes under heavy load if you've done the prerequisite 15 to 20 warm up preloading, and now we're at a full 35, right? But I don't need 25 minutes to get my 5 triples in, because you're typically not doing 5s, those like bigger sets in the Olympic lifts. So I find that it's like a little bit different there, but I still agree with you. I just find that there's like a little bit of nuance there with just because of the movements. Kind of though, because I think these days within CrossFit we have complexes, which I've noticed have made it way, like many other places too, where we'll have like a snatch complex, which takes a bit of time, and you're under fatigue, where you're doing like, pull to the top of the knee, pull to the standing, okay, snatch, and then squat snatch, and that single rep took you a couple minutes, and then building up to that, and then I don't know. I think even the conversation that we're having, you can see where people were like, we just need more exposure to these. And so you can see where the idea of like, hey, let's just have people do these close to every day, made it into our community. It was never out of malice. It was never out of like, let's screw people when they walk in the door. It was like these are complex, or they're really good for us in the case of strength days. So let's do them every day. It'd be an opportunity for us to get a little touches here and there. So I don't hate what happened, but I do think it's a mischaracterization of how we should be treating these. Because they don't, for me, when I look at that, my argument against that is like, we're not looking to get these people strong tomorrow, and we're not looking to get them super fit in a snatch next week. It's like, I want this 15 years down the road, they're continuing to slowly improve, rather than like, yeah, I need them in 6 months to be pro snatchers. And it's like, no, I don't need that at all.
Then I have failed miserably because of 14 years and I'm still not there. I also think that you can get people there without necessarily being heavy, right? Like we've all seen it where just like, there is like, I also think it's worth discussing that like, there's just some shit that we don't know and understand as smart as we all would like to think that we are, with regard to like the black box theory, which is like, many of the things that CrossFitters do, like we'll call it high level CrossFitters because they're kind of the experiments in the whole thing, violate most protocols that we know with regard to training and getting strong and getting fit, and they're still getting fucking strong and fit. And it's just like, so maybe we don't know as much as we do, and maybe there is some things that and I tend to believe that is due to the human being's ability to adapt, like just the mechanism of adaptation. Mm-hmm. And we had just never taken it that far. And all of a sudden we've seen what I consider to be an immense amount of adaptation with regard to general physical human performance in which in the time frames for the adaptations would typically be seen. We're talking about 15 years is like 1 second. You've seen a huge adaptation in like 1 second as far as human beings go. Like their ability to do things. And I think that is like really interesting, because you wouldn't think that would be the case.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's understood within the like sports and exercise science world that like a lot of things that come about, it's not like a study's happening and then they're like, oh my gosh, this works. It's like, it's been working for 15 years and then they study and they're like, this is why this works. It's very rarely it's very rarely on the flip side of that, so there's obviously stuff that we don't understand. And I think one thing to look at too when it comes to strength that I find really fascinating is that like there's a perfect world and there's a perfect person and there's a perfect thing, and like, and in this context this would be the best way to overload the system by this amount of poundage and the blah 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 blah. But then that like takes it out of reality. And it's more. Oh,
dude, I was literally having this conversation today about something else.
Yeah, but it's the same thing where it's like, it takes it out of the reality of like, but that's not how existence works. And that's not how humans work. And that's not how, that's not the day they had leading up to it. And that's not, and there's also like, it has to be doable. It has to be fun. Like you can have something that's like the most perfect program in the world, but if it sucks, nobody's going to do it. So like, what's the context that you build around making something interesting and stimulating while still getting the most bang for your buck with what you're getting from that? And I think that's the play. And I think that's where certain communities might benefit from, every day they're touching it a little. And then other communities are like, the way they work is like, they just need to have a single day during the week where they come in, they smash it. And like, and there's variance there because there's a reality to the people that we deal with. It has to be tailored to be interesting. And I think CrossFit naturally does this. Like naturally in gyms, we build so many intangibles around making it interesting to do. Because just going and lifting by yourself sucks unless you're really into that. Like for most people, they're like, I don't want to lift. But you're like, yeah, do you want to hang out with your friends for a little while? Do you want to like, listen to some jams music and buy some cool knee sleeves and blah, 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 whatever it is. Like there's so many other things that make it fun.
Yeah, that I agree with. And I think people underplay the whole social aspect of the CrossFit gyms. And I find it to be almost annoying at this point, but not the point. The other thing about that is the ultimate proving ground for like whatever somebody's stance is on something is on the floor, right? So like whether we're talking about lifting or whether we're talking about rep schemes or whatever, or we're talking about, we could talk gymnastics and these are the perfect positions. And I'm like, the most optimal, most efficient thing will naturally make its way to the competition floor because people want to win. So I'm like, if that is in fact the best way to do it, then everybody will be doing it because the outcome will lead everybody to getting to that position. And I think a lot of people, there's tends to be a disconnect with regard to, here's what I think, and this is my hypothesis, versus like, this is what's happening on the floor right now. And it's like, there has to be like some sort of bridge, which is like, okay, I understand what you're saying there, but practically speaking, that's not really how it works.
Right.
Right. Like it's not sustainable. Like you said, it's not doable. Right. Like I get in a vacuum, like, yes, I should have this exact position all the time and I should never deviate. I'm like, but if I can't hold that position, given the task, well, then it's not the most efficient means of accomplishing the task.
Right. Right.
And maybe I'm just fucking going off on a tangent there, but I agree with you in the sense that like, there's the text and there's what we know about training, and then there's what actually happens on the floor with people, and we have to be able to mesh the two. I have to be able to mesh what I know about like what can and should happen theoretically with what's happening in front of me, and how do I bridge that gap with the person that's literally real life in front of me right now. Totally.
I mean, that's everything. I mean, that's everything we do as coaches. I don't know. I something what you said there, I took it incorrectly, but you were saying that the thing that works the best will win. But in the context of win at what, and so like you were referencing will be the thing that you end up using. But I was thinking like the style of training that works the best will be the people who win. And I'm like, well, what are they trying to do? Because CrossFit sport's different.
Correct.
So the thing that everyone's going to be doing, that the winners will be doing is a highly specialized version of it. So but I think what we can work it back to is what works in the gym to win. And what does winning mean for an affiliate and a coach? And I think to me, that's what we have to have a conversation around is like, what does that mean? What are we?
Well, I'll pose it to you. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think that means having members for 10, 15, 20 years who continue to see relative improvement and want to be in that space. And they still enjoy coming back, both on an emotional level and a physiological level. They're seeing successes.
Ooh, Texas, I haven't seen that in a long time. I agree with you on that 100%. So this is a kind of like how I'll always like simplify kind of like the definition of fitness and what's the goal, right? So if we think, and it's kind of like how I lead the programming lecture, hey, what's CrossFit? What's the definition of fitness? Work capacity across broad time and modal domains. What's the goal? Increase it. I was like, okay, cool. Now let's put that in layman's terms. Did they get stronger? Did they get faster? Did they develop skills that they previously did not have? Yeah. And if I can do that over a long enough time frame, that's what I consider to be winning. Meaning like if you come back in here in a year, they will all be better at the things. And if you come back in here in 2 years, they will all be better at the things without any sort of quantification, just better than they were before. Because if I look at this on a long enough trajectory, year over year, I don't really want to see these huge leaps.
Right.
Because that means I probably gave up something in order to make that happen.
Yeah.
And it's going to start to peter out at some point too.
Yeah.
Meaning like I no longer have anywhere to go. From Philip Kelly, Pat, Miranda, and Wes. So man, that was a while ago from Miranda.
Dude, Philip, been a bit.
Pull up some of those questions, Cody, that we had before. And thank you for the donation, Philip. Cody will now get a small coffee. How much time rest between sets do you recommend?
On true working sets, at least 3-4 minutes. I mean, at least, I mean, honestly, true working sets, 4 minutes at least. But I think in the context of an affiliate, 3 minutes can happen at times because you're like, JK, guys, we're going to have 3 minutes. We're going to lift on that 3-minute timer because I ran out of time by telling those jokes earlier. But if you're looking as like a true strength day, like 4 minutes.
Yeah, I also think context there, like where are we at in the sets, right? The lighter sets you might not need 4. Once you get to the back end of those, you're like, fuck, you might want 5. Like, I don't really want to touch that bar right now. Like, I'm going to feel like I'm going to vomit and shit my pants. So I'm going to take the extra 60 seconds.
Well, follow up to that is like, resting for 4 minutes for a CrossFitter is like, it's a nightmare, right? Like, what am I going to do with all this time? Yeah, like, what am I going to do? So, how do you keep your athletes engaged in the middle of that? What do you do in sets?
Well, this goes back to what Pat brought up earlier, which is if they feel the need to go faster, then we had an incorrect starting point. Because I tell people, like, if you've done this correctly, you will not want to go in 60 seconds or 2 minutes. You're going to be like, fuck, I'm going to need a minute here to get my life together, and then I'm going to attempt this yet again. And so what I would argue is, if that is the case, if people are wanting to move faster, they're not at the right working weight. If the goal is to go heavy that day. Now, if the goal is to just get some weight on the bar and move, kind of move at whatever pace you want.
Yeah.
But if in fact the goal is like, if in fact the goal is like, yo, today is eyes pop out of your head day, you're not going to want 2 minutes.
Ideally. Like, if you've gone the right set. Yeah.
But you've gone the right set.
In that time, like, honestly, people are the most open to talking and chatting and building community
100%.
like than any other time. They are no-brainer days to me, to pair people up, have them lift on the same squat rack, help each other out, spot each other. Like, strength days to me are community building days. And they're relationship building days where you just get to get in there and dig into times that you can't on days where there's a bunch of shit going on. So, like, people who don't do this, or who have so much shit going on in a day they never can connect or get their members to come together, I'm like, you're missing a huge golden opportunity. And those 4 minute sets, those rests, they're real connection time. Like you're not, it's hard to be more vulnerable than, like, I just did the heaviest lift ever, I'm so fatigued, and you're coming over and asking me about that, and then, like, how's everything else? Like, it's awesome.
That I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I think is lost inside of the boxes that are doing the strengthless Metcon. I'm like, you're forfeiting. You're like, it's hard for you to be like, we have the best community and the best coaches. I'm like, if you've never actually have opportunity for community interaction inside of your class, because it's just a fucking Congo line from event to event to event, and nobody ever actually interacts. And I'm like, man, I struggle to believe that you have a great community. But, like, I love heavy days inside the box. I'm like, pull up a box, pull up a med ball, because you're going to be sitting down as we work. You're not going to want to do that. You sit up, fucking bring your coffee. I don't care. But, like, we're going to lift heavy today. So settle in. Dude, it's so fun.
And then when you, like, I think it's the best way to pull in people too who are kind of, like, not antisocial, but they don't, like, fit in with a clique. You can be like, hey, Jim, you're partnering up with Phil today. And Phil's like, oh, I've got friends today, like and like that should be a conscious decision. Like, there's these people who don't have the same level of social capabilities that everyone else does. And you can help not make them friends, but, like, you're giving them a person to talk to, and that's rad. Like, that's what you should, that's part of our roles. It's like, it's unwritten in our rules, but that's what builds these communities, is being able to do so. And I think this is a great day to do so.
Well, this is also something people ask all the time. So when we create essentially, like, coach eval checklists, one of them is one of the boxes in there is, like, is there like any sort of, like, social interaction? And people are always like, what are you talking about, social interaction? People automatically think, like, games. And I'm like, if you want to throw a game in every once in a while, great. I'm not a big fan of games, but
I love games.
Well, within reason. I like certain games. I don't like stupid games. I like games that are like.
You can't just throw those two words out and then tell me. Like, give me a stupid game. What's a stupid game to you, Mr. Fernandez?
The pizza game with the ab mat is a stupid game.
Man, you suck at that game, don't you? Oh,
I'm a champion. No, I'm a champion in that game. Like, I fucking pick on people. I cheat in that game, but I'm like, but it's dumb. It serves no purpose.
It's amazing. How about you ever do the freeze tag between the legs?
No.
So it's everyone has to, like, they you do like an arch. So if you get tagged, you have to go into, like, a hole,
like a junkyard dog.
Position. And then to get unfrozen, someone has to slide under you and then jump over you. And so, like, adults just go ape shit for it, man.
Well, that's the problem, right? It's just, like, injuries happen. I'm like, God damn.
Oh, shush.
I like the simple games, which is, like the
like
what's
solitaire
the
and
rowing?
stuff. Yeah, cool, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we're gonna knit. We're gonna crochet.
Have you played like volleyball, tennis, but like with a
ball?
smaller, like a tennis ball and some ab mats?
No.
Yeah, so it's like the concept of volleyball where you get 3 hits, but you have to hit this tennis ball back and forth over a stack of boxes, which is your net with ab mats.
Oh, that's awesome. We used to play
I could be down
dodgeball.
for that.
We used to play
Ball
dodgeball.
sports I'm okay with.
We played dodgeball all the time and my morning classes, and like my 6 a.m. was into it. Like, and what we did is you had to play opposite arm. So like if you're a good thrower, you had to throw with your left hand. So it was so funny to watch people running up and just Gah! And no joke, we're playing with Neil Maddox. He comes into one of the classes and just starts bombing balls at people. And I was like, "What are you doing, Neil?" He's like, "You said play with your left hand. I'm left-handed." I'm like, Neil.
You missed the point.
No. Like, it was so funny. Anyway, keep going.
I completely forgot what we were talking about.
You were talking
Cody,
about is there community time?
It's one of the things that people miss out on inside of the gym, right? And you can, like you said, you can pair up new people with more experienced people so that you can help move them along in their kind of that familiarization stage. You get the opportunity to celebrate other people when you do it that way, when just like there's lots of PRs and there's time to like watch people lift, time to coach a little bit more, time to have longer conversations with people about coaching. It's just fun, man. And I think, when done correctly, I think it's just a huge relief to the coach. Be like, oh, dude, all I got to do is coach a heavy day today. I'm like, this is great. I have like all the time in the world to really get things dialed in, to dig in like quite a bit.
Yeah.
So on heavy days, like, and most of the time, we tell people be more directive, right? Like people want to be told what to do, where to go. Like I don't want to have to think when I'm in the gym, but like there's a couple different ways to do heavy days, right? Like you could set the time frame for people, like, hey, we're going to go every 5 minutes for 5 sets, or do we just say 25 minutes on you, go? Like what's the best way to do that?
Is that Dan's question?
It's a summation of Dan's question, which is with that 25 minutes, do you control the time sets, example, every 2 minutes on the minute, etc., or does it go when you're ready? And I'll give my answer to this, which is like, it's kind of in the middle, right? If it's an EMOM, that's pretty simple, but I want the athletes to take ownership of their training session. Now, that doesn't mean I'm just like, go forth and make it up. Like you need to be giving guidance, which is like, guys, we have 25 minutes to go. Before I hit that 3, 2, 1, go and start that clock, we should all be at our heavy sets, which means like you guys should be moving about every 3 to 4 minutes in order to get these 6 sets in. And then as we work through, I won't necessarily do an EMOM because like some people are going to move a little bit faster, a little bit slower based on where they're at. I'll give those reminders, meaning like at 12 minutes, I'll be like, you should be halfway right now. If you're not, we need to speed up. If you've already reached your last set, you've fucked up, keep going, right? Like you're actually not done. Just keep going. So I don't think it needs to be a hard set rule. It just needs to be guiding them, right? So I think there's a difference between like spoon feeding and guiding. And as a coach, sometimes you need to walk that tightrope of like, I don't necessarily need to control every aspect of this class, because there's arguments for every 2 minutes on the minute is not appropriate for lifting heavy, because you wouldn't, the percentages might not line up for that. And we're not doing West Side barbell. Like it's just like, that's a certain type of training. So either way, whether you do that EMOM or it should be directive in nature. You should be constantly giving updates with the crew on like, hey, you should be here.
Yeah.
If you're not, let's chat. That's the way I approach it.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think the newer you are, the more structure makes it easier. You just say, hey, every 4 minutes, we're going to do a lift, guys. Get into your groups of 3, first person lifts. So then you can kind of feel that out. So like if you're not used to managing big groups of people and you don't know the athletes and how they warm up, like that structure allows for freedom for you to be like, okay, now we're left. And then now we're left. Like, and then as you get more experience, like you are, Jason, like you can be like, all right, we got 25 minutes, guys. I want to see at least 5 sets. Like we're working to this, build to a heavy, blah, blah, blah. And then there's also days where it's build to a heavy, it's not, there's not a set number of sets. So like, I I think structure gives a bit of freedom for newer coaches, and then that way you can have them lift. But there's also something to be said for just like trying to figure it out through there. Just know you're going to make some mistakes.
Well, so that's where I was going to go with that. This also, I think, kind of depends on what are your strengths and your weaknesses. Meaning, so let's just take 2 of the 6 criteria. If group management is your weakness, what I would venture to guess is in an EMOM setting, you would be more focused on the clock and less focused on coaching, at which point you would miss a lot of opportunities to coach. Versus if you like the technical aspect and you're running on a 2-minute clock, I've seen it happen, I don't know, a million times. Like they lose track of the clock, and therefore, like somebody's like, should we lift now? And it's like the 2:30 mark instead of the 2-minute mark. So I think it's just understanding, like, can I manage both of these at the same time effectively? And if you can't, then you need to approach the class, with the appropriate plan in that. Because I've seen many coaches just like cannot manage both at the same time. They cannot be truly engaged with an athlete. They don't have that like internal clock. And I'm like, dude, either like pick one. Like have somebody else help you with the clock and coach these athletes, or watch the clock and we'll figure out some other way to do this. But like, if you can't manage both, then we shouldn't set ourselves up for failure until you can kind of develop that experience with, this is about 90 seconds, 30 seconds. Good. So I can do a little bit of bouncing back and forth. But like you said, Pat, like those are reps, but it starts with like recognizing like how much can I manage in the context of one group and one class. And the clock can be a real problem for people if they're like so focused on the clock.
You said pick one, but I'm just going to go ahead and clarify. Don't pick focusing on the clock. Pick focusing on the people and delineate. Like you're like, pick one. You could just stare at the clock and let the people just fuck around in class for the entire time.
Go.
Yeah. Don't pick that one. Where I find myself having that even happen to me is Tabata days where I don't have like a good Tabata. I'm like, son of a time, 3, 2, God, son of a gun again. I didn't see anyone. We'll keep going. Like, but yeah, if you're going to pick one, don't pick one. Just pick the focus on people and tell one of your teachers in class to say, hey, can you just remind me when it's the change time?
Yeah. Somebody collectively as a group, when everybody sees the clock coming up, everybody just yell something, anything. Yell a word. What other questions do we have in there, Cody?
What about heavy days for gymnastics movements, right? Like we don't just see pure heavy days for like weighted pull-ups or weighted dips or something like that, like very often, or even like weighted muscle-ups.
I think we have one this week.
You have one this week?
I think we do on Woo Affiliate. We have one either this week or next week. We have a heavy weighted pull-up.
I mean, like usually you see that as part of like a strength plus Metcon, right? Like it's like, we're going to do this first and then we're going to follow it up with some breathe hard stuff.
And why do you think so? I think. What do you think, Cody?
I mean, honestly, I think most coaches just don't know how to fill the time there, right? Like what am I going to do when someone burns out on a weighted pull-up? They're done in 6 minutes. What do I do now?
Yeah. And I think there is a reality there. There's like localized muscle fatigue for these much smaller muscle groups compared to like a back squat or front squat. Like systemically, you're not loaded quite the same way. So you can fail. And then you're like, okay, now what? And you didn't get maybe as much from that day as possible. So on those days, we do a lot of prepping with like, what are the different types of scales that could get someone there? So if it's a weighted pull-up day, what do negatives look like for your people? What kind of ring rows can they do? And we really build in these other skill work components. But I think there is a reality to the fact that one of those days could likely handle another component to it, just because it's not like we're doing max L sits today. All right, go home. It's like, well, like he held for 4 seconds. He did a 4-second hold and came down. So there's just a reality to that stimulus isn't gonna give. It's not going to be as beneficial to the overall. Like it's good for them if they just focused on that, but it's different than just focusing on a back squat, and it's different than just focusing on a thing. You can do it coupled with a few other things. Like it's different.
Yeah, this is where I become a little bit more cognizant of like there's the the in a vacuum program, like this is good for fitness and like this is what they should do. And then again, there's the reality, which is like nobody's fucking showing up for that. So I don't care how exciting my class is, like they're not excited about that training session, right? Like meaning I will not have normal attendance if I do that. Like I don't care how fun your classes are, like you will just see a drop off in attendance when you do those days. And this is where I'm like, okay, we have to acknowledge that at some point good programming would be at odds with member attendance. So I have to figure out like, how do I mesh those two together? And what you said, Pat, there's like, how do I take those things that I know we need to do and I sprinkle them in a fashion that won't affect attendance? I got to do both, right? So technique and intensity. It's like, I need to get that in there and I also need people to show up. So I have to figure out like, what's the creative ways of doing that? And you can get real creative with that stuff, but those are the ones where I'm like, you kind of sneak them in either before or after, like in a smaller time frame, and you can get them in, and the people that really want to dig in can dig in there, and the people that just kind of want to dabble can dabble, and you kind of like inch them along the way. But I think that just has to be acknowledged. Like I find it to be not beneficial for the clientele or the business to program days like that. Like, well, and it has nothing to do with they're not good.
It's beneficial
they're not
for the
good.
clientele if they show up. So here's what I would challenge that, Jay, is like, yes, I agree with you. They need to show up. And I think if you're struggling with attendance and if you're struggling with membership and if you're struggling with having people fully bought into what you're doing at all, then I absolutely think that you need to take that into consideration. But I would argue that if you perceive your gym as a place that people couldn't leave because it's so good, like not because they could move, not because of the things, but like, there's no other gym they would go to other than I can't afford it. Like they would look at the other gym in the area. They'd be like, this is my home. I would never leave here. Then I think you owe it to them to program days that challenge them mentally to show up. And then you have a continued conversation around, why didn't you show up? It looked boring. You should do this boring thing because I know it's good for you and you trust me. And I think that's a unicorn style gym I'm talking about. But what I would say is like in an ideal world, in a vacuum, I think that would be the argument I would have against that. And I honestly would say that about some of
I
the
agree.
gyms I've previously had.
I agree with your argument. The issue is it's in a vacuum, and no matter how you try to peel that, there becomes a practical problem that I'm not entirely sure is solvable. Because like, let's just say I could do that. I could probably make that happen if the clientele number was small enough. Right. If you move into 150 to 200 people or more, there's no way that I'm going to be able to like, because you're talking about like a huge sum of people, all at varying degrees in their fitness journey. And it's just like, okay, I have to deal with the reality on the ground, which is like, I can get them there, but it's going to take me a longer period of time to make that happen where they're going to be bought in. And I have to act that way. And the reality is just like, even if that one person that started 2 years ago is now there, I now have a new person that's not there. Yeah. And my goal as a gym owner is like, they need to come in and train. And I think you just have to get creative with the programming. I think you have to be able to serve multiple populations simultaneously inside of a class, both with your coaching skill and the ability to scale and meet people with that. And potentially, and this is kind of a conversation you and I were having offline a couple of weeks ago, Pat, is like being a little bit more creative with like how you write the programming to essentially accommodate multiple variations of a workout inside of 1 hour in order to meet people where they're at. So this is one I struggle with a lot because like I agree with you, and then I also disagree because of what I see on the floor, not just in my gym, but like at all the gyms that we work with.
You're probably
just like I can't ignore that.
As a coach and gym owner is what I'm thinking.
That's very true.
Because I was talking about on a scale of like 400 members, and we're sitting in there with 400 members.
Never mind.
And I'm saying maybe they don't show up, but is it my responsibility to be like, yeah, I want you to show up, but I also want you to grow up. Like I want you to value this whole thing. And yes, I know what you're saying. And I play this because it was so fun for me to like, I am not conflict averse. I am the opposite of conflict averse. I am prone.
That's why we get along.
Yes, is like, because I don't think there's negative outcomes after this, as long as at the end, like, we can have different opinions and we go back and forth. But I love it when members come and they're like, dude, that was stupid. Why'd you do that? And I go, yeah, let's have a conversation. I'll tell you exactly why I did that, But you're right. I think in reality, 99% of the time, it's important the most important thing we can do is have those members walk through that door. So if we can trick them into doing it, I think it might be more beneficial to the majority. But yeah, I was just posing the opposite side.
But that's where the value of the conversation comes in, because I do agree with that side of the argument. Like, I'm like, oh yes. However, there's this other thing over here, which is the actual gym. And like, it tends to be a much stickier, nuanced topic than we would like it to be. Like, yes, they need to do that. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to go about doing this over time?
For sure.
Cool. Anything else you want to throw in there, Cody, from a question standpoint? Do we have any other ones in the chat, or you want to start post any of the other ones?
I think I don't know. One start over here. Thoughts on lifting heavy after Metcon?
Thoughts on it? It's harder.
Do it? Yes. No.
I think it's just knowing what it is. Like, knowing, ideally, if you're doing that in a class, something in the Metcon had the similar lift that you are doing afterwards. It wouldn't be like, oh, we're doing this Metcon, and then afterwards there's a lift that doesn't have any of the things that were in the Metcon, because then just timing wise, you have to teach so much. So it kind of does a disservice to the coach and then the members, because they don't get as much from it. But I think it's just harder. I mean, like, you're tired, so then lifts are harder, but it's fun. I mean, like, we do it all, like, human beings can do it, and I enjoy it. And yeah, you're nice.
I think there's some interesting stuff there. Like, we've programmed a couple different workouts. One is a mile run into a 1 rep max back squat. The other one is a 2K row into a max front squat. And dude, people PR on those days. Like, there's something to be said for, like, slow twitch muscle fiber into a heavy lift, or slow twitch muscle movement into a heavy lift. Not all the time, but there's something to be said for that. I also think it's totally fine, but the question becomes, like, what's the priority?
Yeah.
The priority would probably be the first training session. And I think that just needs to be communicated and needs to be programmed appropriately, which is like, okay, we are going to lift after this, but, like, guys, these are not intended to be heavy. Like, consider these more like drop sets. We're going to get some lifting in, but I'm not trying to crush you, because you're probably going to move less optimally based on coming off of this Metcon. And we should all just acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I mean, setting that standard for the day, I think, is important, and it's on the coach's shoulders. But I think it's also interesting what you just said. Like, when you're saying earlier, ways we can have multiple versions of the same workout within a class. That's essentially, if you do that, you can actually talk to different people and say, hey, I want you to treat the second half more seriously. And then talk to this person and say, I want you to treat the Metcon more seriously. Like, today for you, it's about the Metcon. And hey, today for you, it's about the strength. Like, right. And then but that's coaching. And, like, that's the beauty of it. That's why the hard, fast rules around programming are like, dude, you're tripping balls. Like, you gotta, it's like, you can write, it looks like one way on paper, but whatever they come in with, you got to be like, what does this person need? Yeah. You know what you're doing today? You're doing this. And it's right. The same general thing, but their focus is different. And focus means everything.
I dig it. Cool. I think we covered most of the stuff in the chat, as well as some of the stuff that Cody had brought up. So at the end of the day,
get my jeans on and go play some volleyball.
Yeah. Please videotape that and give that dude, like, a cool high five.
My brother.
But I think heavy days, it's worth exploring inside of the gym. Like, how are you executing those? Could you execute them better? Because at the end of the day, nobody is upset about being strong.
So I'll just leave it with this. It's simple in essence. Like, people need to go heavy, and how they do that, there's many different ways to do it. And it's really, you can get as detailed as you want, but you have to have people doing heavy days at some point, in some way, because it's essential to our program. And the more complex you make it, the more nuanced you have to be as a programmer. So if you want to add a bunch of shit to days, you better be extremely focused with how you're doing that and why you're doing that. So I think if you're less subtle, have less things. If you're more subtle and you know the intricacies of programming, you can layer and add and do a day and blah, blah, blah. Like, but if you're not, don't just go at it with a hammer. Like, be more, less is more for you, if that's the case.
I dig it. Cody, take us out.